In the 1950s, county fair judges would use a literal silver knife to inspect the density of a chocolate cake made entirely out of Hellmann's mayonnaise. There were no digital ovens, no box mix shortcuts, and absolutely zero margin for error. The legendary blue ribbon recipes that dominated these fierce mid-century competitions, like the famous burnt sugar cake on your screen, are now quietly fading into history. Today, we are opening the forgotten recipe boxes to count down 25 prize-winning fair desserts that time completely forgot. Number 25. The Pickin Cake. In the mid-1950s, a new category dominated Southern fair tracks: convenience innovation. The Pickin Cake became an instant blue ribbon contender by utilizing the decade's newest grocery store arrivals. Bakers walked into their local Piggly Wiggly, bypassing the fresh orchard aisle for boxes of Duncan Hines orange cake mix and cans of Del Monte mandarin oranges. By whipping the whole orange segments directly into the batter, the fruit broke apart, releasing natural oils that kept the sponge stable under the hot August fair tents. The real judging criteria, however, sat in the frosting. Instead of heavy buttercream, contestants used bird's eye frozen whipped topping, folded with crushed pineapple. Judges looked for a pristine, chilled presentation that offered a refreshing contrast to the sweltering summer heat. It proved that convenience foods could still deliver prize-winning luxury, setting the stage for our next entry, which swapped fresh dairy for another surprising pantry staple. Number 24. The Southern Mayonnaise Cake. While born out of thrift in earlier decades, 1950s fair judges evaluated the mayonnaise cake strictly on technical execution. In an era celebrating suburban abundance, choosing mayonnaise over Land O'Lakes butter was a calculated risk. Bakers used exactly 1 cup of Duke's or Hellmann's blue ribbon mayonnaise from the A&P shelf. Because mayonnaise is a stable emulsion of oil and egg yolks, it interacted with baking cocoa differently than solid fats, producing an extraordinarily uniform, tight crumb. Judges inspected the cake's density with a silver knife. A blue ribbon winner had to be deeply chocolatey and rich without leaving a trace of oil on the blade. It was traditionally entered completely uniced, accented only by a uniform dusting of domino powdered sugar. Achieving that degree of balanced density required intense precision, a skill that was equally critical for managing the heavy ingredients in our next regional classic. Number 23. Japanese Fruit Pie. Despite its exotic name, the Japanese fruit pie is a deep South heritage recipe that ruled the pie division in Kentucky and Tennessee. It served as the ultimate test of a baker's ability to control structural density. The filling required a rich custard base sharpened with a single tablespoon of Heinz apple cider vinegar to cut the sweetness of dried raisins, chopped native pecans, and Baker's Angel Flake coconut. The judging difficulty was steep. Heavy mix-ins naturally sink during baking. To secure a first-place ribbon, the baker had to temper the egg base perfectly so the shredded coconut would rise to the surface, forming a toasted macaron-like upper crust, while the raisins suspended evenly throughout the center. Managing these complex imported textures became a massive trend in the mid-century, paving the way for a tropical fruit loaf that took the fairgrounds by storm well before it ever hit print. Number 22. The Uniced Hummingbird Ancestor. Decades before Southern Living magazine popularized the cream cheese frosted hummingbird cake in 1978, its ancestor was winning ribbons under the name Dr. Bird Cake. In the 1950s, post-war shipping advancements filled neighborhood Kroger stores with exotic tropical produce. Bakers seized on fresh bananas and canned crushed pineapple, mashing them into a dense, heavy spice batter. Fair rules in the 1950s required this specific category to be entered as a loaf or tube cake with absolutely no icing allowed. Judges scored the entry purely on the chemistry of the bake. Without frosting to hide flaws, the baker relied entirely on the natural sugars of the pineapple and the oils of hand-chopped pecans to keep the dense loaf from drying out. This reliance on uniform moisture and strict presentation rules was a tough standard to meet, a challenge mirrored in the highly regulated cookie bar divisions across the aisle. Number 21. Vintage apricot bars. The 1950s was the golden age of the cookie bar division, as community cookbooks standardized fast, square-cut desserts. At the county fair, these bars competed in the dense pastry category. Bakers built a rigid shortbread foundation using gold medal flour and creamed butter, par baking it before spreading a thick layer of tart Del Monte apricot preserves. The top was finished with a precise walnut crumble. Fair judges demanded mathematical symmetry. When sliced for the display plate, the bars had to show 3 perfectly distinct level layers. If the apricot jam bled into the bottom crust or made the shortbread soggy, the entry was instantly disqualified from ribbon consideration. While these bars relied on flawless structural layers, our next confection did away with baking entirely, relying instead on pure molecular transformation. Number 20. Peanut butter pinwheels. This entry occupied the traditional confections division and showcased pure mid-century kitchen chemistry. Peanut butter pinwheels, often called potato candy, contained no flour. Bakers boiled a single russet potato, mashed it to absolute smoothness, and meticulously beat in pounds of domino powdered sugar. Chemically, the starch transformed the sugar into a workable, pliable fondant dough. The baker rolled the dough flat between sheets of Waxtex wax paper, spread a thin, uniform layer of salty, skippy peanut butter, and rolled it into a tight log. Judges evaluated the slice with a magnifying lens. The spirals had to be perfectly concentric and razor-sharp, with no bleeding between the white sugar dough and the tan peanut butter. Manipulating simple sugars into a flawless canvas was the hallmark of an elite confectioner, a feat that grew even more grueling when dealing with hot caramel syrups. Number 19. SEAFOAM fudge. Also known as brown sugar fudge, SEAFOAM fudge was notoriously temperamental, making a successful batch an automatic frontrunner for a blue ribbon. Bakers boiled Dixie crystals, dark brown sugar, with PET evaporated milk on their Frigidaire electric stoves to exactly 240 degrees, the softball stage. The critical window occurred during the cooling phase. The baker had to beat the hot mixture by hand with a wooden spoon at a precise rhythm. Stop beating too early, and the sugar recrystallized into a grainy failure. Beat too long, and it hardened in the pan. A blue ribbon winner required a light caramel hue, a glossy sheen, and an airy texture that dissolved instantly on the judge's palate. This battle against sugar crystallization required absolute focus, but it was nothing compared to fighting the invisible humidity levels that could ruin our next delicate treat. Number 18. Old-fashioned Southern Divinity. Divinity is a classic meringue-based confection that served as a direct test of a baker's relationship with local climate conditions. Made by slowly streaming a boiling mixture of sugar and Caro corn syrup into stiffly beaten egg whites, the candy was heavily folded with native harvested pecans. Because Divinity is highly hygroscopic, it absorbs moisture directly from the air. Making this candy on a humid, muggy August fair morning meant the structures would instantly weep and flatten on the display table. Blue ribbon bakers monitored the barometer, often waiting for a crisp, dry dawn to drop the snowy mounds onto wax paper so they would hold their signature glossy, coiled peaks. Defying the elements to lock in a perfect crunch was a rare skill, one that old-school cooks also used to perfect the golden bread toppings in the comfort dessert category. Number 17. Apple Brown Betty. Entering the fruit dessert pavilion, the Apple Brown Betty highlighted the early harvest orchard crops. Unlike a standard pie, this heritage dish abandoned the traditional pastry crust entirely. Bakers alternated layers of spiced, sliced tart apples with buttered, sweetened breadcrumbs chopped from a fresh loaf of Wonder Bread. Judges scored the dish based on textural contrast. The baking technique required the top layer of crumbs to dehydrate and bake into a crispy, caramelized shell, while the hidden interior layers absorbed the boiling apple juices without degrading into mush. It was judged at room temperature to ensure the structural layers held their form. This masterful interplay of absorption and structure paved the way for the next generation of desserts, which moved from the warmth of the oven to the chill of the modern kitchen. Number 16. The 1950s Icebox Banana Pudding. While warm, meringue-topped puddings were historical standards, the 1950s fair circuit saw a massive surge in chilled icebox entries, driven by the universal adoption of modern electric household refrigerators. This version required cooking a precise vanilla egg custard on the stovetop using whole milk and sugar. Contestants layered the hot custard in glass bowls with fresh sliced bananas and Nabisco Nilla wafers purchased from the local colonial store. The blue ribbon's secret was timing. The bowl had to sit in the icebox for a precise window, long enough for the Nilla wafers to absorb moisture and soften into a cake-like density, but not long enough for the bananas to oxidize and turn brown before judging. This exact control over softening was the opposite of the next summer harvest staple, which required a rapid steam to puff up biscuit dough on the open stove. Number 15. Blackberry dumplings. This stovetop dessert dominated midsummer county fairs when wild blackberries ripened along regional fence lines. Bakers brought fresh picked berries to a boil with sugar inside a heavy Griswold cast iron skillet, then dropped uniform spoonfuls of a stiff, scratch buttermilk biscuit dough directly into the bubbling purple syrup. The skillet was immediately sealed with a heavy lid to trap the steam. Judges cut directly into the center of the dumplings. To win a ribbon, the dough had to be perfectly aerated, light, and thoroughly cooked through to the core, completely saturated with deep purple juice on the exterior without becoming waterlogged or gummy. Achieving that level of tenderness from a simple batter was a challenge shared by the cobbler makers next door, who used a secret water wash to flip the texture entirely. Number 14. The SUGAR-CRUST Peach Cobbler. High summer fairs across Georgia and the Carolinas judged peach cobblers with absolute severity. Contestants sliced peak-season fresh peaches, tossing them with sugar, and baking them beneath a thick buttermilk batter made with swan's down cake flour. The blue ribbon trick that caught the judges' attention happened seconds before the pan entered the oven. The baker poured a precise splash of boiling hot sugar water directly over the surface of the raw batter. This altered the starch gelatinization on top, creating a signature crackly, glistening sugar crust that shattered under a spoon while keeping the cobbler dough underneath light and fluffy. Creating such a distinct topping by letting ingredients separate naturally was a great strategy, and it was used to perfection in our next classic custard entry. Number 13. Classic Coconut Custard Pie. A mainstay of the highly competitive deep dish custard division, this pie was evaluated on the separation of its elements. Bakers rolled out a delicate lard or Crisco shortening crust, filling it with a rich egg and cream custard base, topped with a heavy handful of shredded coconut. During the slow bake, physics did the work. The lightweight coconut shreds naturally floated to the surface. Judges looked for a flawless execution where the top coconut layer became deeply toasted and golden brown, forming a protective, crunchy barrier that kept the delicate custard underneath perfectly smooth, uncurdled, and free of weeping. Letting simple fats settle into an immaculate, distinct layer was an art form, and it reached its absolute peak in our next regional fair specialty. Number 12. Vintage Transparent Pie. Hailing from regional fairs near Maysville, Kentucky, the transparent pie was a showcase of pure dairy fat control. While it structurally resembles a chess pie, the filling contains absolutely no cornmeal or flour. Bakers creamed massive quantities of pure sweet cream butter with granulated sugar, whole eggs, and heavy cream. When baked slowly, the sugar fully dissolved into the melting fats. A blue ribbon winner presented a delicate, crackly, sugary top crust, beneath which the filling settled into a uniform, translucent amber gel. If the fat separated or turned greasy in the oven, the judge would bypass the entry entirely. Keeping these unthickened fats from separating was incredibly difficult, leading innovative bakers to create dual-layered hybrid pies where structural density kept the elements perfectly aligned. Number 11. Sweet Potato Pecan Hybrid Pie. This hybrid entry was popularized by highly competitive bakers looking to capture two judging categories simultaneously. The bottom layer consisted of a dense, smooth, sweet potato custard spiced with nutmeg and ginger. The top layer was a traditional gooey pecan pie syrup packed with halved pecans. The technical challenge was preventing the two mixtures from bleeding together during the bake. The heavy pecan syrup had to float cleanly on top of the dense potato base. Judges looked for a sharp, clean horizon line between the orange sweet potato and the dark pecan layer when a slice was removed. This standard of perfect structural separation was an incredible achievement, but sometimes the greatest victories came from using a completely unexpected ingredient to balance the flavor. Number 10. Old School Vinegar Pie. Often referred to historically as a desperation pie, 1950s fair judges valued this entry not because ingredients were scarce, but because it proved a baker's mastery over flavor chemistry. The recipe used exactly 1 tablespoon of Heinz apple cider vinegar, whisked into sugar, eggs, and melted butter. Acetic acid in the vinegar reacted during the bake to mimic the bright, sharp acidity of fresh lemon juice. Judges graded this blind against citrus pies. It took a blue ribbon if the custard achieved absolute clarity, baking into a shimmering, golden, silky filling without a single speck of curdled egg grain. This level of immaculate, smooth clarity was the ultimate prize in custard baking, setting the standard for the most legendary Southern benchmark of all. Number 9. 1950s Buttermilk Chess Pie. The definitive benchmark of Southern baking skill. Because the ingredient list was incredibly sparse, tangy buttermilk, sugar, eggs, and a single tablespoon of yellow cornmeal for stability, there was nowhere for a flawed technique to hide. Judges looked for absolute uniformity. A blue ribbon chess pie could not have any cracks, bubbling, or dark brown spots on the surface. The top had to be a perfectly flat, pale golden crust, balancing a sharp, clean contrast between intense sugar caramelization and the natural tang of the buttermilk. While chess pies represented the height of rustic perfection, the next evolution of mid-century pies aimed for a towering, elegant aesthetic that dominated the modern division. Number 8. The Mile High Lemon Chiffon Pie. Chiffon pies were the ultimate status symbol of the mid-century suburban kitchen, celebrating the mechanical power of electric stand mixers and refrigeration. Bakers dissolved Knox unflavored gelatin into a cooked lemon curd, then meticulously folded in stiffly whipped egg whites. Judges looked for structural stability. The chiffon had to hold a razor-sharp vertical edge when sliced with a knife, yet remain light enough to dissolve like a cloud on the tongue without feeling rubbery. This mastery of aerated structure quickly spread from pies to the cake division, where liquid fats revolutionized how a sponge was built. Number 7. The 1950s Chiffon Marble Cake. In the early 1950s, General Mills popularized a revolutionary cake method, substituting traditional butter with liquid vegetable oil. This gave birth to the Fair Circuit's chiffon cake division. Bakers used Wesson cooking oil to build a sponge that was lighter than a standard pound cake, but richer than angel food, marbling half the batter with Hershey's cocoa powder. The blue ribbon secret lay in the cooling process. Bakers intentionally left their heavy tube pans completely ungreased so the batter could grip the metal walls as it rose. The moment it left the oven, the pan was inverted over a glass Coca-Cola bottle to cool upside down, preventing the delicate cell walls from collapsing. Keeping a cake perfectly light and structural took intense care, an effort matched only by the high-stakes multi-layered liquor cakes of the Deep South. Number 6. The Southern Lane Cake. Immortalized in classic Southern literature, The Lane cake was a high-status, expensive entry reserved for the most serious contestants. It featured fine white sponge layers bound together by a rich, cooked egg yolk syrup loaded with pecans, shredded coconut, and chopped raisins heavily macerated in southern bourbon or brandy. The entire structure was sealed inside a mountain of fluffy, boiled white icing. Judges scored this cake on maturity. Master bakers knew the cake had to be baked and sealed days before the fair opened, allowing the liquor to fully mellow and infuse into the grain of the sponge. Letting a delicate sponge rest and cure was a great display of patience, but our next entry required the exact opposite, an adrenaline-fueled race against the clock. Number 5. Jelly Roll with Blackberry Jam. Sitting firmly in the technical skill pavilion, the jelly roll was a high-stress category. Judges could identify a structural flaw from across the room. Bakers whipped a delicate sponge batter using swan's down cake flour, baking it flat on a large sheet pan. The blue ribbon trick required turning the cake out onto a tea towel dusted with powdered sugar and rolling it tightly while screaming hot from the oven to program the cake's memory. Once cooled, it was unrolled, spread with homemade seedless blackberry jam, and re-rolled. If the sponge cracked, tore, or showed an uneven spiral, it was instantly dropped from ribbon contention. This emphasis on flawless chemical elasticity was incredible, and it found a new modern ally when corporate soda sponsors entered the arena. Number 4. Blue Ribbon Coca-Cola Cake. The 1950s saw regional soda bottling plants step up to sponsor county fair baking divisions, launching the Coca-Cola cake into national prominence. Bakers poured a full cup of classic Coca-Cola directly into a rich chocolate fudge batter. The natural acidity and intense carbonation of the soda acted as a powerful leavening agent, creating an extraordinarily soft, aerated crumb structure. The cake was finished with a warm chocolate icing made with more soda and chopped pecans, poured over the cake the exact second it left the oven to create an ultra-moist, fudge-like seal. This dark, rich convenience cake was an instant favorite, providing a stark visual contrast to the pristine, snowy centerpiece that defined the traditional division. Number 3. The 7-minute White Mountain Cake. Serving as the visual centerpiece of the cake pavilion, the White Mountain Cake had to look completely flawless. It required a multi-layered sponge made strictly with egg whites, excluding the yolks entirely, to keep the interior crumb a snow-white color, utilizing gold medal flour from the Kroger list. The defining element was the traditional 7-minute icing, a glossy meringue whipped continuously over a boiling double boiler. Judges inspected the exterior for a glossy, porcelain-like sheen that held sharp, dramatic peaks without deflating or weeping under the hot display lights. While achieving this pure, bright finish was a crowning achievement, the next tier of competition relied on hand-foraged ingredients to truly stand out. Number 2. Black Walnut Pound Cake. While standard vanilla pound cakes were common, a contestant looking to catch a judge's eye turned to the highly prized, robust flavor of the wild black walnut. Families spent the preceding autumn foraging these nuts along forest lines, hulling them by hand and curing them specifically for summer fair entries. The nuts were folded into a heavy 1-pound butter batter. The blue ribbon secret was suspension. Bakers had to toss the heavy black walnuts in a dust of flour before adding them to the bowl. If this step was skipped, the dense nuts would sink to the bottom of the tube pan during the long, slow bake, creating a flawed, top-heavy cake that lost the ribbon. Preventing these dense elements from sinking was a major victory, yet the absolute pinnacle of fair baking required mastering the dangerous art of boiling raw sugar. Number 1. Old-fashioned burnt sugar cake. The undisputed holy grail of 1950s county fair baking. The burnt sugar cake required absolute control over fire and sugar, representing the absolute pinnacle of scratch baking mastery. Housewives did not use store-bought extracts. They stood over their stoves, carefully heating pure white sugar in a cast-iron pan until it melted into a deep, dangerous mahogany-colored syrup, right on the edge of burning. This intensely fragrant syrup was cooled and beaten directly into the cake batter and used to flavor a cooked panuche frosting. Judges looked for a deep, complex, smoky caramel profile that was completely free of bitterness. A flawless burnt sugar cake was considered a true culinary work of art, almost always securing the coveted first-place blue ribbon and anchoring its place as the definitive champion of mid-century baking history. And there you have it. As the final blue ribbons were pinned and the afternoon sun began to dip behind the fairground pavilions, these spectacular desserts represented far more than just culinary skill. They were a testament to an era when time slowed down enough to let a cake cool upside down over a glass bottle, or to stand over a hot stove, carefully caramelizing sugar by hand. The women who baked them didn't just share recipes, they shared a piece of their heritage, baked with an absolute pride that filled the kitchens of our childhoods. While many of these exact flavors may be fading into the pages of worn, handwritten cookbooks, the memories of the love and care baked into every slice will never truly disappear. If you remember any of these prize-winning desserts from your family's table, or if you were lucky enough to walk through those crowded fair pavilions yourself, let me know your favorite in the comments below. Thank you so much for stepping back in time with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.